Welcome to the channel. This is my friend Chelsea. She recently did a double barrel non-duality with us and interacted with some of our channel members, and we had a great time, great conversation. So I invited her back to have a kind of conversation and interview about her her process and all that she's gone through. And so I'll just introduce Chelsea.
Thanks, Angela. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So I guess let's just start with wherever feels relevant for you to start. So take us back as far as we need to go to understand you enough to know like how you kind of came into this whole process and the trajectory.
Cool. Yeah, that's such a big question. I feel like I've lived like multiple past lifetimes in this lifetime. So I'm just feeling into where the energy would want to go. Yeah, it's funny. What's coming up is when I was a little kid, um, I was raised Catholic, and I don't consider myself Catholic or religion at all at this point in my life. Um, but I really wanted to be a nun when I was like a really devout, like little, probably like 5 or 6 year old. Um, and I feel like there was always just this like pull to, um, yeah, all the things that there aren't words for, all the things that, like I make videos and um, there's a sense of expressing this thing that can't be expressed that I feel like as a little kid, um, Jesus Christ really spoke to me in a way that no one else was speaking to me. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, it's interesting that this is coming up because this is so not a part of my life now, but I feel like this, like to go back to this journey for me, I feel like I've never not been on this journey.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I can relate to that.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I think my adult life, um, non-duality and awakening specifically, was never something I was looking for.
Hmm.
Well, I shouldn't say never. I feel like I got pulled into seeking kind of after the fact,
Hmm.
because I didn't have context. Um, my husband, who's had a very deep and is a very deeply awake person, like had a lot of context and understanding and depth that I didn't have in this world, but I had other forms of um, spiritual experience that I guess are relevant
Hmm.
textually now. But my life in terms of non-duality just kind of happened and unfolded and pulled me into it. Um, and so it's really interesting and strange to talk about.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I
almost
totally
like,
I totally get that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like this unfolding that sometimes putting words on it makes it further away in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that and well, for me, I didn't talk about all of this that you can't talk about, but I didn't even try for years and years, and it didn't cross my mind to talk about it at all.
Mhm.
Um, and then I don't know, it just started happening somewhat organically. It would come up here and there and so forth, um, but still, it's funny because if I open my mouth, I know I'm gonna use words that are just gonna be inaccurate, and that is what it is. At the same time, it's funny because reflecting back, and I know the sort of caution around talking about your own experience too literally or too directly because it really can cause people to sort of seek. what they think you have or what they think happened to you, and doubt
Yeah.
their own experience, which is exactly not what is really relevant. What's relevant is to sort of embrace your own experience. At the same
Mhm.
time, what actually woke me up, or what started the process unfolding, at least in the relative, was reading accounts of people going through it. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that can happen. So I've kind of, one of the sort of prongs of my channel, I suppose, is sort of interviewing people who talk about it, and they can talk about it however they want to, but there's a transmission that can happen through that, and we always kind of drop those cautions that, it's not going to look like this for you, but you might get the flavor of that profound transformation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Did you notice it, like, when your younger adult life, were there moments or like periods where things started to seem to shift for you, or something was opening beyond what you thought you were, or
Yeah, and I apologize if the traffic gets loud outside my window, but yeah, I think now having more context for it, I can see how open I was then. Um, and certainly like I would write poetry as like a young, really young, like I feel like I wrote poetry before I knew how to write anything. And like looking back, that was the experience of awakening. Like there's a purity and just like an unfiltered, um, and I see it in my son. Like there's just like the self-conscious life,
Hmm.
um, and then adolescence, like young adulthood, like all the forcing into the shoulds and separating out and all the pain that comes with that.
Hmm.
Um, I certainly fell into, but shortly after college, I went to India. I was a yoga teacher. Like there was a lot of spiritual openings, and I became a meditation teacher. I went and became a psychologist. Like there's always been that thread in my life. But I would say like the awakening, the shift in identity, which was never something I was seeking, like happened related to my health
Hmm.
and very life altering trauma, that I never would have wanted. I never
Hmm.
would have thought that. And yeah, like I hear people talk about awakening as a death, and that's like really, really hard to talk about because it's obvious like I didn't die in my physical form. And it's really hard to actually talk about death because like um, it's even when someone's soul like transcends the body, like what do we actually know about what's happening? But here there was like and is because so I have multiple sclerosis, and just to kind of, I don't know how much context is needed because there's like an understanding of what that is, for many people, and that the lived experience is not what other people tell me it is.
Hmm.
Um, and in many facets of that, it's like a relapse progression, remission, like parts of the functioning die away. That's my experience, is there's a death of functioning in the body, in the mind, and in this form, and that like in a very, very profound relapse, like I died. I
Hmm.
totally died, and I was alive, and I had no context to talk about this with my family, except for my husband, who is like amazing, and it it's really indescribable. It's Yeah, and it's not like it's something that happened in the past that I'm talking about. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's this like unfolding. Um, yeah. So I don't know if that like is comprehensible at all, but
Well, for me it is.
okay.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, I feel you. It's like, it's absolutely impossible to talk about, and at the same time it's the most obvious thing there is. Actually, it's what's not here is the most obvious thing, certainly in relation to what it seemed like was here, I suppose.
Yeah.
um and in relation to what we kind of act like is there in the relative in a certain way, which is kind of funny. um but I've heard some and made my own descriptions that are kind of poetic, I suppose. But to me, I've said, and it does feel this way, it's like I feel like I'm just nose to nose with death all the time. Like
Yeah.
it's very intimate.
Mhm.
um and nothing really ever comes into being in a way, but nothing
Mhm.
ever goes out of, there's nothing coming or going, you know. I have a friend who said once, I feel like I'm a newborn baby and a corpse at the same time, all the
Mhm.
time. And it's like, yeah, yep, I can relate to that.
Yeah, and I like that because feel like there's like in spirituality in general, like um there's this pull to romanticizing it, like to not see the corpse aspect of it, to see that like, oh, there's some arrival point where like you're this awakened being or something, that like that it's everything. It's um yeah, it's it's such an experience. Like it's whatever is right now, like for you, that's being avoided. And
Mm.
when you're not avoiding it, it's like everything that's that the belief system thinks that this shouldn't be is like dying. It's like
Yeah.
it's painful and beautiful at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah. The thread you said about um it's what you're avoiding, um the ability to look, or I don't know if it's an ability, but the act of just
Mhm.
going right to that, into that fully, sort of really letting go there,
Mhm.
seeing that nothing is holding anyway. um that's such a profound mm, act, I suppose, or happenstance. And I'm not 100% sure. Well, I'm not very sure at all that you can like choose to do that. You can't really choose to do that coming from where you think you are, but you can be open to it.
Mhm.
And these tragedies or disruptions in life
Mhm.
are really huge opportunities, and it may just happen outside your hands anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think that's where um like I've experienced a lot of spiritual harm around healing, like what healing looks like, uh, what awakening looks like in the physical form of just that certain diseases or certain disabilities can be transcended to arrive at um, some more whole place. And that, like, for me, this disability, like, I would never ask for it. And it is such a gift. Like, and I'm not like, that's not a sound bite. Like, this is like the most valuable aspect of my life. Like, it unfolds me. Like, there's no, um, yeah, there's no compromise, which is really amazing. And I think
Mhm.
that there are a lot of belief structures around like having an able body and um, that slip in. Like I think there's a lot of spiritual teachings in health and illness and um, cognitive changes in life, whether you're going through something spiritual or um, Parkinson's or dementia or like the transcendence of the body. That there's a lot of fear around that people um, understandably want to heal or fix, and often it comes from a very like loving and kind place. But when people say like, I'm so sorry you're sick, like of course I'm not upset that they're being compassionate, but um, my experience of MS is very different than that. And it's also why I don't really talk about my health with people, um, because it also, like awakening, is so indescribable and
Mm.
Um, there's just like a sacredness to it, I think.
Mm. That's beautiful. So I'm really on the same page with you in regards to, if anyone didn't catch what you said, the bit about the ideas of healing, spiritual healing. Let me just put it in a concrete way, and see if you agree. So what I see happening, and I really try to caution against this by trying to reframe what this actually is about, this process. It's not about transcending your humanness in the relative, meaning you're not going to get magic powers. You're not going to escape the physicality that you're not going to escape the relative physicality of this body mind that is going to grow old, probably acquire diseases, may acquire severe disease, will die, will decay, and will rot in its grave. Like that's just the truth. And that the spirituality is not to like avoid that truth or pretend it's not there, or at sooner or later, if you do it right, it will put you nose to nose with that truth in a way you can't avoid it at all. Whether you have a severe disease, a mild disease, or no disease in this moment, you'll be living face to face, nose to nose with oblivion, and you'll feel it in every pore of your body. Yeah. Um, that can really scare people. So I'm cautious how and when I talk about it and how directly.
Yeah.
But to leave it out would be, in my opinion, just irresponsible.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's unnatural. It doesn't mean that the spiritual process isn't worthwhile. That doesn't mean any of those things. Um, what it means is you can transcend the suffering around all of those ideas you have, that our whole goal here is to transcend the physical form in some way. It's not really like in life, not just spirituality, Um, a common one that I end up sort of addressing, reasonably common, is the idea, because I've worked with people with bipolar disorder, and I really caution them, like you can have an awakening, you can feel free like you've never felt free before, but you haven't really hit the shadow stuff yet. And I tell people, don't make changes to your medications. Don't just decide you don't have, a bipolar disorder anymore. Like, don't make big decisions. Just wait. If you may have less symptomatology later on and long-standing course of the disease, it's fine, but be patient. It's like saying when awakening is going to cure me of type 1 diabetes. It would be absurd to think you don't need insulin anymore, something like that. So that's one area that does come up, and people do well. I find, even with bipolar disorder, some people, even with some psychotic features, through the awakening process, if they have good insight and they don't, make changes to their medications without coordinating that with a provider or something. So those practical situations do come up with this, and to me, that does kind of line up with some of that thinking, like, oh, if you have bipolar disorder, it's you're deluded or something. It's like, no, it's a physiologic process. The body, is never going to function at 100% perfect health, whatever that even is. It's just not reality. So all these bodies are subject to this stuff. So I think that's what you're kind of talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like whatever that fear brings up for people of, I think disease and disability brings up a lot of fear, that is also really fruitful to work with. I mean, I like all the identity around like really terrible, very ableist beliefs in myself, of my worthlessness, my disgust, my unattractiveness, like you name it. Like facing that, being with the suffering, not like separating from the suffering, but seeing, how the suffering unfolds here. It's so different to be like unfolding with it than to be pushing it away.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it is like, it's scary. And I think that like, yeah, I didn't look for this awakening journey, and I think a lot of people that I work with, because I'm also a clinician, I work with, from my perspective, like any path of psychological healing is on the awakening path, whether someone frames it that way or not. um, that sometimes we need help to have scaffolding, to feel supported, and to look into our blind spots. And that's okay too. Like, just to know where you're at in that moment feels like the most important thing. And sometimes, like, in that moment, we feel awareness, like, I need help to really see what I'm avoiding or what I'm afraid of, or like, no one can do the work for you of like being present in your life, but we can and are like each other's support. And so I think, like, I see a lot of beauty in, even in my channel, sometimes people having a negative response to things that I post, or reactivity, of just like, yeah, seeing that humanity that pulls us into something. And I think it's all possible, and it all does happen in the awakening process.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I feel that, yeah, the bit you said about if hearing this, hearing what we're talking about, because this could be considered very heavy to a lot of people, and in one sense it is, the subject matter that we've been covering. Whatever that brings up for you though, that is the path. Like that, if you want to take up the path right now, you don't
Mhm.
have to. You can go do whatever you want to do. But I mean, if you really want to take up the path right now, and you want to know what awakening is about, and you want to know what's, what that ultimate seeming barrier is, and penetrating it and getting to the root of identity, like that's it. Like listen to this and find what it brings up in you and go right
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, yeah,
And investigate it. Just, feel, and ask a few questions, but know, trust that that is where you're being directed by your own instinct, actually, so. Mm,
yeah, totally. And some people I work with, like, are just as afraid of feeling like the positive end of the spectrum of like joy and um, confidence, and all of these pieces of
mm,
like, it's all there.
mhm.
Yeah.
I find the same. I find that, we're not only afraid of intense, what we might call negative feelings. I don't use the term, but just to put it in a conventional term, but things like fear, shame, anger, we're not just avoidant of them. We're actually avoidant of like ecstasy, joy, surprise, spontaneity, childlike wonder,
Yeah.
being goofy. Like we're afraid of, not we, but the mind identified world, the world of being sort of hypnotized by the thoughts and all that many people can relate to. That world, it really just contracts the emotional bandwidth. And strangely enough, what that ends up doing is causing us to act unconsciously out of the emotions that are repressed. And strangely, like avoiding seeing it somehow. It's very, very odd, actually. It's kind of a magic trick that happens there, but it can become extremely destructive when there's a lot of repressed emotion and a lot of delusion built into that. But it just narrows the bandwidth of experience such that you become rather rigid, and there is a sort of rigidity to the whole agreed upon social, construct of humanity that says this is what it is to be a person. And
Right.
that's more binding than a lot of us think, including the sort of positive aspects like healing, like we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking
Right.
about blowing up all contexts and seeing what's, well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. People like apologize to me sometimes when they start to get better.
Mm,
Um, like they need something to work on in therapy. Like they're almost guilty. Like, I had a good week, feeling content, feeling like at peace, and then
mm,
we can consciously work on that. Like, the goal of therapy is to be free, to be done, to not, not feel disconnected from your own power. And yeah, that is very common. And it's a fun place to work because
mm.
there's a lot there.
So how do you relate, like what you described as your power, in a sort of maybe therapeutic context with the the truth of no self, the truth of, what
Mm,
we were also talking about? How do those two relate, if they do? Um, because this is a really sticky point for people a lot when it's like they ask me as they're kind of starting to face this, well, what about the law of attraction? What about, that kind of thing?
mhm.
And I don't have, I kind of just say that's not really what I'm talking about ultimately. There may be a use for that in certain parts of your life and focusing attention and effort and all that. There's probably valuable
Yeah.
aspects to that at times. But if you conflate that with what the unfolding process is doing, then
Mhm.
what you can really sort of go to war with it and not realize that's what you're doing by trying to control everything. And so how do you put that together with the idea of therapeutic, like finding your own power as an healthy individual?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. I mean, I also have a similar um, sense of the law of attraction. Like I don't really go down that realm. I don't know that much about it, to be honest, but the exposure I've had, it's just not alive for me. Um, Not to say that it's invalid, but um, yeah, I think like it's an exploration of how like it's almost like my process of psychology, and I know that some people like kind of bash psychology in the spiritual realm, and certainly there are bad therapists out there, and there's been harm like in any profession. But like I love working with the parts of ourselves that cover up like our truth, and that is like ego states, like that is identity. Um, and so it's almost like I'm like kind of like helping someone detect like what parts are covering and what parts are here, befriending them, um, and not that they're bad, because then they're also like unfolding in this moment and they're also welcome. But just like broadening out to see how they're all kind of necessary to kind of get to this like I feel like the unity experience is something that's like easy to get attached to, maybe in the same way that um, the law of attraction like is a little bit um, not alive for me, because in my experience like that comes and goes, like we don't have control over that. um, but we always have access to like the the this is so hard to talk about, um, to like the bigger than core self, the whole. And that is like at a certain point it's a trust and a surrender that that is the power. And
Mhm.
that's often what we're parts of us are running from. um, so it's kind of a process of looking together of like what parts are we willing to bring into awareness and attention, what parts are in our blind spots, um, and
Mhm.
I don't know if this is answering your question,
It's
but
beautiful. It's beautiful. What I hear to summarize, I like to take things and make them simple.
yeah,
but
yeah, I know I
but I,
talk and I don't make things
and you're
simple.
but well, no, I mean, we're creating this as we're going too. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
I've ever even talked about this in this specific way, but the power that we're talking about with the sort of therapeutic health is the three words that came to me hearing what you said was access. That's your power is your access. Your power is your ability, your latent maybe ability to see clearly. And that is powerful beyond what almost anyone could even imagine. And the willingness to see. And so that's surrender. You said essentially access, surrender, and trust. I couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have picked three better words for what power actually means rather than being in control
Yeah.
based on thoughts or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because the first way, that the way we're talking about the access, the trust, and the surrender, that will take you beyond all limitations. It will take you beyond all identity. Really, it will surprise you
Mhm.
in many ways. It will
Yeah.
challenge you in ways you didn't know you could be challenged. But it will show you the truth.
Right, right, right. And it's so fun to talk to you in this way, because like I have conventional ways of talking about this with my clients, and like there's a framework I love and multiple frameworks I love, but what we're talking about right now I feel like hooks into the IFS framework, if you're familiar with that, internal family systems. um, that is very, very like metaphoric to the awakening process. It has limitations, and like anything, it's kind of like a story that's not the direct experience of it. But um, yeah, it's really like frameworks are really, I think, helpful for kind of approaching this. But then at a certain point, it's so much more than that, um, and most of my time, I mean, recently I've been working more with people like directly, like talking about awakening and pointing, and that has been really beautiful. But much of the time I'm like um, speaking a different language, and um, yeah,
Hmm.
it's so curious to kind of explore together with you and have this
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah, I agree. So I also wanted to reflect on something you said a few minutes ago about that there are people who are skeptical about psychology therapy and as it relates to awakening and so forth. And I agree that there are for sure there and many for good reason. There are people who have been harmed in situations, therapeutic situations. There are also people who have been just probably just really confused, as confused as maybe the therapist was because they were going through awakening and a therapist
Mhm.
wasn't savvy to what was actually happening and so forth. With that said, the vast majority of therapists are their heart's in the right place. They're trying to help and they're doing the best they can. And but there are good therapists. There are clear therapists, and that can be tremendously powerful and tremendously helpful. And I know that for sure. And what I wanted to point out about you is like every time I talk to you or just see you, even I watch your videos, what I feel is this just tremendous amount of heart and feminine energy.
Mhm.
And that is so powerful when it comes. So I'm talking to anyone who's out there waking up and watches my channel and is like, what do I do? What's the next thing I do? Who do I talk to? How do I go about this? Um, there's such a power in actually interacting with somebody who has gone through this. And to add to that, someone who it moves in the feminine aspect, it has a different feel to it, but it's very, very powerful. It's very transmissive, especially in the relational field. And third, a psychologist who's also classically trained and can use all of those tools, but the tools are sort of brought into play secondary to the transmission itself and to your own number one, tremendous compassion that's going to be automatic because you just can't not feel everything that person's feeling and be right where they are and without holding back and just that feminine aspect like so to me it's tremendously valuable actually for sure to have an interaction with someone like you who and you may be the to be honest you may be the only person that someone has encountered that really could I know it's going to sound weird, but like love them unconditionally, see them unconditionally,
Yeah.
right? Because everyone else in our lives often has some agenda or
Yeah.
some history with us, and we have to, you know, go into complicity with that, and they go into complicity, and then all this stuff. But if someone talks to you, and you have really no agenda,
Mhm.
because you can actually, well, the emptiness is there, and there's something really, really powerful and transformative about that. And when you can add to that the heart that you come forward with, like I feel like I want to cry every time I talk to you. It's just so
Aw.
beautiful. But that heart is so important because that talks very, very deeply to people and it says you're safe. They have to know they're safe at a deep level. And then
Yeah.
this can be powerfully transformative. So I just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Angelo. And I think that it's so alive because for me, there's such a vulnerability in awakening too. Like you're destabilizing like identity structure, who you are, like what's truth, what's not truth. And to find the right support is like, and that's where my gratitude of I mean, like, yeah, awakening happened to me, but like the process is through my support system and my husband and my, the life structures that scaffolded me. And I've certainly been in moments in my life where I was not with the right support, and I think also in awakening moments too, where someone was giving me a different identity, and that like on a spiritual level, like the level of harm that can happen. I'm a trauma therapist, so I work with people on trauma. Like spiritual trauma is pretty unparalleled, so it's really important to work with someone where that authenticity and that like safeness is felt, by you, the person seeking the help. And I think like that intuition is so important in this process of like knowing what feels right to you. And if it doesn't feel right, like don't push that down. Like you're your own authority in this process.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, this I want to ask you what you mean by spiritual trauma and the categories and whatever, but I just
Mhm.
want to point out one thing about what you just said. Um, the kind of most notorious types of spiritual leaders or whatever that end up being like cult leaders and have these kind of tactics. What they do is they prey on people who will willingly push that their own instinct down that says there's something wrong here. They
Yeah,
literally look for that person.
right.
They get groups of people like that together who will overlook their own red flag
Yeah,
in internal monitoring systems. So don't overlook it. Like there's something in you that's saying no, this person is not safe. Fucking run. You know, like turn around and go because they're not safe.
mhm.
Likely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so I did want to ask you when you said spiritual trauma, do you mean people who have been sort of in um, abusive situations with spiritual leaders? Do you mean just the trauma of going through shifts when you don't even know what's happening? Or what specifically do you mean
Yeah, I
there?
mean, I would say both. I would say like religious harm, like coming out of churches that told you like, your will doesn't matter. God's will is like co-opting truth and then telling you when you have some intuitive sense of what is true that you're wrong, you can't trust yourself. Um, like that kind of disempowerment is really insidious because then you internalize that and especially folks I've worked with who this started at an early age and then the family system like reinforces it. But then people who are authentically on a path who come across someone, you know, a, um, an cult-like leader, or even like I think someone with a conceptual knowledge of awakening who has co-opted it maybe too much in their head, and then it's like an idea of what it is, and then it becomes something else, and then the same thing happens where it pulls you subtly out of your truth, and because of some power dynamic or inferiority or sense of specialness or sense of like unworthiness on the teacher's part, it really causes harm. And it can be really hard to see sometimes. Like I'll be honest. Like I've been in situations where I didn't see it until after the fact, and yeah, I think it's such a vulnerable place to be, and so I
Mm.
think having that sense of safety and support and love, if you really know and you have a sense that you need support, um, is so important. And then I would also say, like, I think what you're doing, Angelo, is so unique and so amazing in that, like, I see a lot of people who are looking for help when they don't need it, and like afraid to take that next step of, um, like they've done all the work, they've done all the programs or all of the steps on the path, and they're caught up in here and they're not ready to just trust themselves, like going on a retreat or dropping into like a deeper level of experience and like really taking that authority on themselves. I think you are like opening the world up to seeing like this is in your hands. Like everyone is awake, not everyone realizes it. So that like so empowering, and I think that's so important in this process. That yes, we need help sometimes, and yes, we also need to feel like we're empowered on our own.
Yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate the feedback. It really is that freedom from extremes, what this all ends up being about freedom from extremes. And the
Yeah,
deeper it goes, the more you find these subtle tendencies towards one extreme or another. And
yeah,
you can dissolve them again and again. But yeah, in one extreme, it's like the sort of, I don't know, patriarchy or the idea that, religion has to tell me what I believe, what I do, who I am, that I'm okay. And,
mhm,
or you can go away from Western spirituality and put it on a sort of someone who could be manipulative in contemporary spirituality or an Eastern tradition or something.
mhm,
That's one extreme, and that's not really helpful. The other extreme is like can be like so independent in a way that you become avoidant or disassociated. Like I don't want help from anyone or anything, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
so somewhere in there, there's a sweet spot. There are times you're going to need help. There are times that the relational work is going to be very valuable.
Yeah.
And there are also times when you just got to go, okay, I've got to stop looking outside myself. I got to stop looking into my therapist to make me feel better, to my preacher to make me feel better, to my spiritual teacher, and even to God or whatever you think is happening. Like you have to really, I don't know, it's like take that solitary inward journey at some point.
Yeah.
And it may only take you a second, like, but it's got to be fully authentic, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of fascinated with the whole therapy from an awakened person or by an awakened person. I know that probably makes you feel uncomfortable even to say that, but I know there's tremendous value. And I also I get this request very frequently. A lot of people ask, like, well, do you know any therapists and psychologists? And I am planning, I've kind of mentioned this to you, I'm planning on making a sort of small database on my channel for people who are therapists, psychologists, and so forth, who also are awake themselves and have experience working through this process with people. I also agree with you that, to be honest, I've always sort of thought therapy. I don't know how you could separate that from the true quote unquote spiritual process or the awakening process. It's really just a matter of how far do you want to go. You know what I mean? Like at some point, if you start asking the questions in an honest way about what's actually happening in here with an open-ended question, meaning you actually are open to whatever answer arrives,
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
not going to be long before you start pushing up against identity,
Yeah.
and you're going to feel the fear and all the things that come with that. But it's like, how far do you go beyond? I've always thought that was kind of funny with therapy. It's like, how far do you
Mhm.
want to take that?
Yeah.
Because it's going to
Yeah.
go there sooner or later. You know, it's
Definitely.
like Carl Jung, you know, he just kind of kept going, which is beautiful. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, with the right therapist, like it will. And um, I think that's where, like, if you're looking for a therapist, like it should be an interview for you and for them. Is this the right fit? Does this feel alive? Um, but like there are certain modalities that I feel more drawn to as a therapist that I am of like experiential, like um, you know, less CBT, less cognitive focus for me, although I know that there are therapists that can drop right in and it's just like an entry point. Um, but I would say, yeah, I gravitate towards like EMDR and IFS and mindfulness-based approaches and things that, like, I can spend an hour with someone telling a story and talking about, like, what happened, but like people leave different if you have an experience together. If you really drop into what's unfolding right now, doesn't matter what happened last year. Like if it's relevant, it's going to be alive right now. And um, yeah, I think that's what works for me. But I would say finding someone who's just alive in their work is you're going to feel the difference.
Hmm. I mean, it's funny as you say that. That's like pretty much verbatim my approach with people. It's, they don't know me, and we're on a Q&A on a retreat, and they go, oh, okay, so here's what happened 3 months ago, and they tell the story, and I listen to the story, it's all good,
Yeah,
and then this happened and that happened, and then but I'm always just like, okay, well, sometimes I'm really direct and I just go, well, I can't access that, and you actually can't either, so let's just look at what's happening right now. It
yeah,
depends how I feel about the person or what's going on, but ultimately that's all I can really do is just like dive into right now with you, such that I don't even know it. There's no you and me and whatever. And we just investigate it.
yeah,
And we kind of do it really as a dance, because I can feel like if somebody's really getting that existential fear and like a lot of
yeah,
stuff going on, we can just go kind of work with that a little bit, maybe soothe it a little bit, maybe just settle, it's a bit of a dance, but all we're really doing is going directly down into what's here, just driving into where reality just wants to go. It's like, there's nowhere else to go. So it has to
yeah,
come right
yeah,
here.
I love it.
And then the tools come out of the toolbox. If you've learned them, they're in there, and you'll just go, oh, this is a time for IFS. Let's kind of do
Mm-hmm.
that or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I have a question for you then. So let's say, what would be your advice to somebody who is taking up therapy with a, so let's say they already made the decision that, like, I trust this person and I feel a good vibe with them.
Mhm.
What, like, few pieces of advice might you give somebody who's starting out the therapeutic process? Like, what would you tell that patient or client just across the board that will really help them to, I don't know, access what they need to access, open up, trust the process?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I would say that if they can really make sure they're dropped in every session, whether you're a meditation practitioner or you just ground in the body, like move the body before the session, like really get here and now. Um, and I mean, I think it's like the people who heal and get better are the people who are ready and motivated. And there's no real like formula for it. It's just like you can tell some people are ready, and they've been through enough suffering, they've been through enough of the same, and they're willing to look. They're willing to like be here right now, not just talk about it, but like actually drop in, um, and be willing to go where they don't want to go. Like it's just like a willingness, and an honesty. I would say like I don't care if someone comes to work with me and they're afraid that like I'm going to judge them, or they're like they don't really like my modalities and they don't want to say something. Like I just encourage people to be transparent. If they're feeling a certain way about me or another, we can work with that. Like this is a unique relationship where I'm not gonna like storm out or having a conflict with you if things get hard. Like that's where we can like, it's the harvest. It's like going into the hard spots. But I would say like, yeah, do your work to find the right fit for you. That's the other thing that's so invaluable. Like there are a lot of wonderful clinicians out there. Um, and there are a lot of people that are not going to be a good fit for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all very, very helpful. Yeah, specifically the bit about be willing to go where you don't want to go. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and we go to therapy wanting to feel better, right? So that can be evasive, that bit.
Yeah.
Take some
Yeah.
time to
Yeah. There's
realize
a
that's what you're doing.
totally. And I think we run mindfulness groups and retreats too. And I did MBSR training. And so one of my favorite quotes from Jon Kabat-Zinn is like stress reduction requires stress production. So in the process, like we often feel more stress at the beginning, and because we're paying attention to the things that we've been avoiding. And like I get kind of excited when people are like starting to feel, and I'm not like a masochist, but I just like, I can feel that they're going into it and it feels better. And that's where I think a lot of, maybe what we were talking about earlier and what's on my channel, like from the outside seems very dark, but like going into like even suffering or pain, like it's pure. It's not the same as like what the mind says it is from the outside. Like there's joy in pain if it's like directly felt. There's joy in grief. There's joy in anger. Like it's all very, very different if it's unfolding and dropped into in this moment.
Mhm. Yeah, I find exactly that. It's we can easily have a belief that we want to feel better. Of course, that it makes sense, right? Like yeah, I want to feel better. I want to have more, happiness and less, I don't know, tension or something. But what I find people really want, but you can't really know you really want this till you actually contact it. What you really want is to know all of yourself in the relative. You want to touch into all those places. There's nothing more powerful than the shadow. There's nothing more transformative than the shadow, and there's nothing more necessary than to go to the shadow space. Not shadow meaning badness or even negativeness or anything. Shadow just means you haven't been looking there, or for whatever reason. A lot of times it's fear, habit,
Yeah.
all these different things. But that's where the juice is.
Right, right, absolutely.
So, how would you recommend somebody, just if you could give somebody a quick primer for on their own, how to work with emotion? So anyone watching this might will relate, I'm sure, that there may be times when just intense emotions come and you may feel blocked, stuck,
Mhm.
frozen, don't know what you're feeling, or really avoidant. A lot of people ask, what do I do when I'm so distracted? I know there's something here, but I just want to do this. I want to do that. I want to go do this habit, this addiction. Like what do I do when I feel that kind of restlessness to avoid something and I know I'm avoiding it? Like, how would you guide that? Because these are really common questions I get.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if I were in session with someone, like we would go into it and unpack it because usually, like I work a lot with like beliefs and core negative beliefs, and like human beings aren't that complex. We have like a set of beliefs that we share across like countries and cultures, and to they're often obscured. So to kind of like elucidate what's the emotion, like you don't have to have a name for it to feel it in the body, and then to have a sense if there's a belief related to it. And what I mean by core beliefs are like I am statements, like I'm gonna die, I'm unlovable, I'm alone, um, I'm vulnerable, like these kind of like black and white truths where maybe they're not 100% untrue, but there's a whole spectrum of like of other reality that we're not open to when we're caught in that. So really, like it's bringing the attention to like all the multifaceted direct experience right now, and then being with it. So if I were doing EMDR with someone, we would have bilateral stimulation to help the system tolerate what they're avoiding right now. You don't need to be in EMDR therapy to do that. If you have trauma that's triggered, it's helpful. Sometimes our direct experience is very overwhelming. So, depending on your complexity in that moment, I think even just starting with the body is a really good place to be. And if you're triggered, you know, I think, and this is my husband's writing a trauma book right now, but this is like something that I've taken from his work in noticing the fight, flight, freeze response if it's active in your system. If you're going into like, freeze mode, even not literally, but like internally, you can notice that's happening. Like, let it play out. Like, if you have 5 minutes, like go into the bathroom and curl up into a ball until you sense that it subsides a little bit. If you're having a fight response, like go somewhere safe. Let it be as big as it wants to be. If you're with children or something, don't scream, don't hurt other people because anger can be scary. But if you can do it in a safe way, into a pillow or something like that, fight, flight, freeze, let it play out, because what's happening on emotional levels, the body's playing out like its survival mechanism that, like, when we were forced hunter gatherers, like we would survive a threat, like we would freeze, the threat would leave, and then we would like celebrate and come back to baseline. And we don't do that in modern life. We don't celebrate. We don't feel like we survived. And so often, like this, we get stuck in one mode or another subtly.
Mm,
So helping the body like feel like, oh, I survived this. It's relatively safe in this moment, can help us come back. And that would be more of like an intense kind of like emotional reaction. I wouldn't say like do that for every emotion that you have, but to hook the body in can like, be a really accessible starting point for people.
mm, mm. Yeah. What is authenticity to you?
Hmm. I mean, I think what comes up right now is just this, like what's true. Um,
Mm,
um, Honestly, like I think that's the word I use when I talk about awakening to people that I'm doing therapy with, of just like not trying to make this moment anything other than it is, not trying to make myself anything other than what is arising right now.
mm. Gets really simple pretty quick when you
Mhm.
do
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Do you
totally.
find yourself in silence with people a lot?
Yeah, I mean, in session, um, that's my goal is to get there because a lot of healing happens in silence.
Hmm.
Um, but it can be really scary for people, especially if they're not used to it. So it's something that certain modalities can like create, and that's like those are the modalities I gravitate to.
Hmm.
Um, and then, for some people, it kind of takes time to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love retreat. I mean, when I can get people on retreat and they can steep in it, like so much transformation happens, and um, that's amazing.
I
I know
agree
you
with you there.
experience
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when I do retreats, most of them are silent. Well, I've done some semi-silent, but when we do semi-silent, we have like 2 hours in the evening where we can interact. But I usually do something structured. So like
Mhm.
sharing, some kind of sharing or circling, or um, we'll do eye gazing or do like sort of improv type exercises where you have to like have a group presence and pay attention to what everyone else is saying. And so we do or watch a movie, but it'll just be a couple hours. Otherwise, silence all day and a lot of silent meditation. And I think the talks help and the Q&A, all that stuff helps at the retreat, but I really try to emphasize the silence. And I think it can take people a long time to see how powerful it actually is because the mind doesn't value it. The mind, the cognitive process just won't value it. It overlooks it at best.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very uncomfortable for people to stay in prolonged silence, but it's always transformative. So I can't emphasize that enough, especially for someone who avoids it. Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, my most, I guess in the relative sense, my most authentic way of communicating to people or with people is when we're in silence together because it's
Mhm.
just simple movement,
Mhm.
energy. That's
Yeah.
all. And
Yeah.
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 And I can still feel what they're feeling. It's very interesting. The empathic movement and
Right.
all is still there. It's not like it, but it's much more at an energetic level, and there's less complicity layers that keep people from avoiding stuff. And you're just dropped right in. You can't really avoid anything, and you learn you don't have to avoid anything, which is
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. I have a question for you about like being in the world of YouTube, which is like relatively new for me. Um, like, how does that feel for you to be? Because I find the phenomenon of like recording something and putting it out there, and then it's like a thing, and it's like it's very alive when it's recorded, and then it's then a thing. And yeah, I was just curious about how that process has been for you.
It's been interesting. There've been phases like when I first started doing it a couple years ago, it was definitely a little wonky and awkward to talk to a camera for me, strangely. I don't think
Hmm.
I was like nervous or self-conscious. It was just there was no human there. And
Yeah,
so I'm like trying to restructure a conversation I had with someone at a different time. But at the same time, I can feel when it
yeah,
drops into a sort of transmissive space too,
yeah.
because whether someone's there or not, this is still just this. So it was a little awkward for a while and strange to talk on camera. And then I was like, how much do I edit this? How much do I not edit it? And
Mhm.
then the technical challenges of it, I was always trying to like kind of dial that in.
Yeah,
Um, then realizing like right now there's 13,000 people a day that watch my videos. So it's like a stadium watches your videos every day. It's
yeah,
it's really
amazing.
interesting to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
At the same time, I just feel like my normal self. And when people
right.
say, "Oh, wow, that was so powerful and transformative. Thank you." It's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
good. I'm glad," because I really forget. I have no context for it in anything actually. So it's very odd that it doesn't really have that much of an effect on me, strangely. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
um, unless someone reflects or I read a comment and I go, okay, good. And then sometimes the comments can be challenging. It's like some people really push in comments. Some people are just trolling and they're not really trying to do anything but troll or get
mhm,
attention and stuff. So you can kind of get them out of the channel, but some people are kind of oppositional or you can feel the anger and stuff. And I try to feel into like, sometimes I kind of roughhouse with them or joke around with them, or I'm trying to feel into like where their opening point is, or if they have one, or if it's just this stuff could just be freaking them out. It's
yeah,
some of it's very direct. So yeah, the comments, it's a little tricky, but as the channel gets bigger, you can't really respond to all the comments anymore anyway. So that's been, but I've always tried to like gauge, like reading the comments and sort of gauge like, how is this coming across? Am I being too direct at times? Because I could be so direct, it would just freak most people out, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary. Is it useful? Is it practical? Can people take something away from it and apply it? And then I always kind of think of new things I want to do, like the newest thing I'm thinking about is like panels. Like I think it would be nice to have maybe a small panel of therapists or something. I was thinking of a panel for like the feminine aspect of awakening. So I know a lot of women who are deeply realized. I think it would be really cool to have a panel. Um, uh, GLBT or LGBT. I was thinking because I know of several people who are gay or and so forth, and they've gone through the awakening process. And one specifically, my friend Eric from Listen to Sleep, he mentioned in our interview, he said it was in a way it was like coming out all over again. It had a
Mhm.
lot of the features of coming out. So I think of doing things like that just to relate to people who may not necessarily relate to this, because a lot of times we just have a filter and you could watch a video and go, oh, that's great for them, but
Yeah.
that's not me because I'm fill in the blank, whatever
Yeah.
however you identify. So I like to really get it out there and show. That's why I love doing these interviews of people of all different ages and walks of life and blue collar and white collar and different
Mhm.
ways of awakening and all of it. So that's my goal, is to just sort of keep it um, alive in the way that we can just reach people who want to be reached at some level. And so I find it incredibly valuable, actually. It's amazing that YouTube does the marketing for you,
Yeah.
literally. It
Yeah.
markets your videos, it just shows them to people. So,
I know.
you're rewarded for doing good content and good edits and stuff. And so yeah, it's been good. It's rather funny because 3.5 years ago, before the book came out, like
Mhm.
I didn't do most of the stuff I do now. I wasn't even doing like all the kinds of things I'm up to,
Yeah.
posting
Yeah.
stuff and answering comments, and
Yeah.
like it just came this literally just came like a leviathan into my life
Yeah. Same
starting
here.
about 5 or 6 years ago. And then once the book was out, it was just full on. Yeah.
Wow. 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 I
Yeah.
love it.
And in some way, I don't feel any different at all than when I'm mowing my lawn or when I'm at work intubating somebody in the ICU. Last night I was doing that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's just a different texture, but underneath it all, there's something that
Yeah.
never, ever, ever changes. And
So cool.
so neat. Yeah. So, your videos are awesome, and I keep getting good feedback. So they're just so sweet and direct and simple, and they do drop people in. You have a way of doing that. You definitely do. Your poetry did that.
Mhm.
Again, I think largely it's just like you're very trustable in a really obvious way, and that's 90% of it. As you know, in therapy, like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Um, yeah. Anything else you want to say to anybody who's watching? And
Just thank you. Yeah, this is such an honor, and I love your community, Angelo. So I'm honored to share the space with you, and um, yeah,
well, thank you so much. And we'll get your contact for therapy up on my website actually at some point in the near future, and a
great.
few others that I know. And so that's another resource for people. So thanks again.
Thanks so much.